Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles issues affecting your rights and matters of legal recourse. My name is Dumila Matthias. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by tweeting us at Rights Recourse or calling our studio line on 011 714 5497 or 5498. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. They clean our homes, mind our children, and carry out a host of other chores in our households. But domestic workers are still the most exploited. Despite efforts by government to improve their working conditions, domestic workers are still underpaid, endure poor working conditions, and are deprived of basic employee benefits. This is what the Department of Labour officials heard during the ongoing countrywide consultations to remind stakeholders about the rights of workers in this sector. Today, Rights and Recourse would like to shed some light on the working conditions of domestic workers as they are specified by the national legislation. We would like to get some perspective on sectoral wage determination and other rights for domestic workers. To unpack today's topic are Deputy Minister of Labour, Chief Patekile Olomisa Dilizindaba, Ms. Monica Nduli, Chairperson of the South African Domestic Service and Allied Workers Union, and at our Pretoria studio, Mr. Vic van Vieren, Director from the International Labour Organization. Gentlemen, lady, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Deputy Minister, let's start with you, Dilizindaba. The department has been working on sectoral determination, including minimum wage, a minimum wage that has been so controversial that some people are saying it will cripple the economy. But what is the sectoral determination with regard to domestic workers?
Well, sectoral determination regarding domestic workers has been established by the minister. Those domestic workers who are employed in places such as the metropolitan areas and something like 2,400 plus per month, and those that work in places outside those are supposed to earn more than 1,800 rand. So that is the minimum that has been determined by the minister, having conducted a number of consultative meetings throughout the country.
Ms. Monica Nduli, the other question is the domestic workers have been struggling for over 17 years to get where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, they've been struggling a lot because they have no laws who covered them. So all the things were swept under the carpet about domestic workers. So now we have the laws because government intervened. So now we have to, we're covered to the laws.
Now that we have the sectoral determination and the minimum wage for domestic workers, the department has been going on a roadshow to explain these to the stakeholders. Does this include even the employers?
Well, at the moment, we are not including the employers, even though they are welcome to attend these public meetings. We are concentrating on the domestic workers because they are the most vulnerable members of society. Most of them are not as educated as their employers, and of course they depend entirely on the mercy of those who employ them. Those who employ domestic workers are well off, relatively speaking. They are part of the middle and upper classes, so they are very much aware of their own rights and responsibilities.
Vic, in Pretoria, the International Labour Organization has been a good source of reference in many of these laws and that are taking place in the labour sphere, because you have international expertise that you can give to the department. How is that relationship between the International Labour Organization and the department and the unions working?
Well, we have an excellent relationship with the government and the workers and the employers. And we have this International Convention on Domestic Workers, which is very key to the debate. And the government ratified this convention in 2013. And so the South African government is ahead of the pack when it comes to implementing laws and looking after the well-being of domestic workers. The challenge is the implementation of it, which the Minister referred to, the education of workers and obviously the education of employers.
The other thing that I wanted to know from you whilst we are on this case is what is the, how does South Africa compare to the rest of the world? You said South Africa is ahead in terms of ratifying Convention 89, but how does South Africa compare to the rest of the world?
In terms of the laws and accepting international standards, South Africa is ahead of the rest of the world. Because they've ratified this particular convention and many others that deal with basic worker rights, like freedom of association, the right to collective bargaining. But the challenge for South Africa is the inspectors that deal with these matters are going to find it difficult to reach the many households that we have. Unlike many parts of the world, we rely on a lot of domestic workers in the employment sector, and this is where our challenge lies. And there, I think we've still got a lot of work to do.
Deputy Minister, why are we burdening employers with all of this bureaucracy? They have to take the law, read the law, explain the law to the employees.
Well, we are a constitutional state, and everybody has to live according to the laws of the country. It's every citizen's responsibility to acquaint themselves with the laws. And as I had said, the employers of domestic workers are better off than the people that they employ. So the burden has therefore to lie more on them than on the others. In any event, even in other sectors of employment, you'll find that it is the responsibility of the employer to ensure that the employer himself is registered, for instance, with the UIF, that is the Unemployment Insurance Fund, and that the worker himself also or herself is also registered, so that the employer will be in a position to pay the subscription fees, as well as to ensure that the employee gets these benefits when the time comes.
Mr. Ntuli, how does the union now take all of these things to the employers and explain to them what do they mean, what they really mean?
Actually, for now, it's still hard to go straight to employers because employers doesn't like a union. And what we always do, if a worker have a problem with employer, we ask employer we phone the employer and ask to do the negotiations, to give the date and sit down and negotiate about that. That's what we do.
The determination that the minister was explaining, the sectoral determination, the minimum wage that the employers, especially domestic workers, to get, is the union happy with that?
Determination, yes. Some others we happy, but not all. There is something we need to do about this. It's not enough. I can say that it's not enough.
Earlier I spoke to you off the camera and I said some people pay their employees 2,500 rand, and you said that's within, but still not enough.
Yes, still not enough because domestic workers are parents, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, as like the other people in South Africa, in the country. So we have to deal with some issues or with children needs, I can say needs of a family. So if this 2,500 is not enough because there is some cost, living cost, you know. Yeah, so that's why we're saying that there is a lot we're supposed to done. It's still not enough. But we thank government because she's trying a lot to lift up those, but it's still not enough. We need more.
Well, some employees actually take it upon themselves to educate the children of the domestic workers.
We then encourage employer to take the children of employees to educate them to school.
Yes, you do encourage that.
Yeah, we don't.
You don't? Why?
We don't. The reason why, employer will never increase money because my children,
she'll use that against you.
Exactly. She's supposed to give me enough.
So that you can take care of
so
your
that I
children.
can do it for my own. I must learn to do the things for my own, not someone can do it for me.
Vic, the unions in South Africa normally talk about a living wage. And what is the international understanding of a living wage?
Well, the living wage is something that is determined by country, and one needs to look at the economic situation, the employment situation, and in the South African sense, the sectoral determination is where the ILO would support the process. You know, we need to understand that we're dealing with human beings and not with commodities. And so when you start looking as an employer, being a household employer of a domestic worker, and you approach it from a human being point of view, as Monica's referred to, then you'll find that the employers will give graciously in terms of paying above the minimum wage if they can afford to do so, and also give other benefits. But what we find in practice is that people are saying to domestic workers, just be thankful that you've got a job. And then they work ridiculous hours, underpaid, and they have money deducted for some food and some accommodation, which then makes it extremely difficult for them to survive. So we support the sectoral determination of the government to the extent that it takes all these factors into account.
Minister, the other issue I was thinking about around this issue was, what are the other issues that are to be being discussed in these indabas? I don't think it's only the sectoral determination. There must be other issues.
Well, in the main is the question of the wages, whether in fact their employers are complying with the determination, but also with the question of the living conditions, in the sense that the place where the domestic worker stays, is it good enough for a human being to stay in, and that if the employer decides to let the employee stay in his premises or her premises most of the time, then how much is that employer deducting? Then they were saying in terms of the law, it should not be more than 10% of what you're getting in terms of your salary. And also we talk about the question of vacation, that is leave, maternity leave, and the number of hours that a worker is supposed to work, the question of having a moment to rest and things like that.
Well, we'll come back to that, especially the issue of leave. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse, or email us at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the plight of domestic workers today, and Ms. Nduli, the question I wanted to ask is, what constitutes domestic workers? What are domestic workers? Are these the gardener, the people who work in the house, or gardeners counted as domestic workers?
Okay, yes. Domestic workers is including gardeners, child workers, old age homes, creches. Yes, that's why that in that South there is allied workers, you know,
allied
because
workers and childminders.
Yes, all that childminders. Yes.
The other issue, Deputy Minister, is the right for fair labor practices enshrined in our Constitution, Section 23 of the Constitution. Why have we left this thing for so long, too late, after 21 years? Only now we say we need to sort out this domestic workers area.
Yeah, well, it's a puzzling situation we find ourselves in, that It was only in 1997 when the Basic Conditions of Employment Act was made to apply also with respect to domestic workers. Before then, they were not considered as workers in the true sense of the word, in that they would be entitled to all the rights and privileges that other workers enjoyed. But that was the first step. But we found that the law having been amended to that effect, many of the employers of domestic workers are not complying with the act. That's why we decided now to embark on this roadshow to conscientize the workers about their rights. But there are still some laws that do not apply to the domestic workers, such as the occupational injuries.
Occupational health.
Yeah,
and probably the Unemployment Act.
The Unemployment Insurance Fund.
Insurance Fund.
No, that one is applicable.
Is applicable.
It's the COIDA that is not applicable.
Deputy Minister, let's take this call. I'm not sure who it comes from, but anyway, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello.
Hello,
from the Free State. Sikona Ujan. What is your question?
I would like to talk about this issue of labor, domestic labor.
Yes.
Domestic, yeah. But we are still having a problem in this country, considering the issue of domestic workers. You see, Bob Mateza, if the government is using cheap labor practice in this country, we are going nowhere. Because the problem is coming from the cheap labor practice that the government is using. So if ever we are still going on using it, we don't go nowhere. We'll start there. Thank you.
Well, just hold on. I just want to find out something from you. You are saying government is encouraging cheap labor in South Africa. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying it because everywhere that matters, we are facing this problem of cheap labor practice everywhere in the country, and the problem is not solved. Not getting solved.
Well, I think the department is solving. Let's.
We are still facing that problem. If ever they can fix that problem and maintain that law, then I think we can go ahead. Thank you.
Let's leave it to the Deputy Minister to respond to that, and I think the government is doing a great deal to solve this issue of cheap labor.
Well, indeed, we are doing what we can in the circumstances. You know, the state of the economy, and as we are aware, we are a government that works according to culture of consultation. Everybody who is affected by a particular step that we take, we have to consult them. So these sectoral determinations with respect, in this case, to domestic workers' wages are done after the minister, through the department, has consulted extensively with the workers as well as the employers. So we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where, because we've raised the amount of money that has to be paid to such a level that is unaffordable, at the same time we want to make sure that the amount of wages that is paid to the workers is decent enough. But we concede as a department that this is not enough. It's not yet a living wage. It's far from being a living wage, as has been said by Mama Untuli here, because you cannot afford to pay rent to where you stay, to pay for transport for yourself and for your children to go to school, to buy them uniform, to buy them clothes and everything else that you need. So the national minimum wage that is being talked about now, we're hoping that is going to take us some way towards establishing something like a living wage for the rest of the country, not just for the domestic workers.
Vic, can you have, what is the sense internationally, what's the international best practice? Can you have a determination that is a blanket determination when each household might probably say, what we need is to, each of the employers, their cases needs to be looked at on its merits. What is it that I do in a home every day? Look at it on its merits, and I decide what I will pay the worker. Should we go the blanket route? What is international best practice?
Well, if we allow for each household to determine what the minimum wage should be, you'll find on average we're going to put down the minimum wage rather than increase it, because people are going to argue that their affordability is such that they cannot afford to pay the domestic worker. So we certainly are in favour of a more blanket decision like the sectoral determination, which sets a minimum standard. As I keep coming back to the point, the challenge is to how do we implement it so we can have a national minimum wage which even goes higher than what we've got. We need to get the balance that we don't cause more unemployability, and at the same time we need to be able to implement what we've agreed upon. And that is the big thing. So the education needs to take place of both the employers and workers to understand why it is pitched at that level. So yes, I support the sectoral determination route.
Well, let's take this call from Mpumalanga. Good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Hi, how are you, Mr. Matez?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
Yes, I understand the issue of domestic workers. It's a problem. The 2,500 rand a month, it doesn't go that far.
That was just an example. That it's not a determination. That was an example.
As black people in general. But then again, I think we should look beyond that. The issue of the inflation in the country, it's another problem for me. I think if we can tackle the inflation, the 2,500 rand that you earn a month, it could be something if things are not that expensive in the shop. Because what undermines 2,500 rand a month is the commodities, the things that we buy from the shop. I think that's the main problem for me. They are more than the price that they should be costing.
Yes, thank you, Erwin. After we've spoken to Erwin, Mamunduli, the other issue that I wanted to raise, I was saying to Vic earlier, why are we not allowing the household to decide what do we pay our employee, because we know what he is expected to do. At some stage you might be paying that employee a lot more if we discuss that on its merits. And that is what I was saying.
Yeah, I think particularly Olomisa mentioned that earlier while we speak before on air. Yes, so we are here in South Africa. There is a law control countries, so that's why as a household you're supposed to pay what's supposed government put it on the table.
Deputy Minister, I think Erwin was raising the issues you were raising earlier before we took that call about inflation and everything else.
Yeah, well, I think when the determination is done, it takes into account the question of the inflation. Even when the increase has to be effected, I think after 3 years, it has to take into account the question of inflation. Because I'm talking about the need for affordability, but the minimum, we are talking about a minimum wage that has been determined. It means then that having established that this is the amount you're supposed to pay in terms of the law, it doesn't stop you from negotiating with your employee or the employee negotiating with you as an employer that considering the amount of work I do, the chores I perform, some look after their dogs, they walk them, they wash them, and some even do homework for the children, with the children of the employer, some stuff that she cannot do for her own children. So you should be, as a human being with a conscience, therefore take into account all these other responsibilities and pay your employee more than the government forces you to pay. And also, on the question of implementation, it should not be a responsibility really of government to tell citizens to abide by the law. Most of these people who employ domestic workers, they are members of unions themselves in the places in which they work. They know the rights that are due to them as workers, so they should also know what rights should be accorded to the people they themselves employ in their households.
There is something else. Apparently there is a wage differential, you mentioned it, between what is regarded as metropolitan and small towns or rural areas, but no distinction between live-in domestic workers and the majority who travel home every day is made. How is this determined?
Again, I would imagine, because I have not as yet been involved in the actual determination, the consultative meetings that take place before the determination is done, but I would imagine all of those considerations are taken into account, the distances they have to travel, and all of those things, whether they should be living in their own places or in their employers' places. That's why the understanding is that those people who live in well-off areas should be able to afford to pay wages that are more than those who live in outlying areas, rural areas, where there isn't much of economic activity taking place.
Mamuduli, quickly, abanye balala who sleep in, the others are sleeping in, abanye bayekaya. Therefore, the money should not be the same. Should it not? Should it be?
The money should be the same, but employers are supposed to pay transport money on top of that.
On top of the money they pay.
Yes.
They should provide transport money.
Exactly. Exactly.
But if on top of the money they pay, why does the union discourage the employer from educating the children of the employee? Because it takes off a huge burden from the employee.
No, as I said, this is true. As I said, we have to learn to do things
for ourselves.
Yes. I cannot depend to someone that she's going to do this for me. I must do it for myself. She must pay a living wage employer. Living wage, not minimum.
Oh, sorry, I actually thought I wanted to go to Vic van Vuren down in Pretoria, but I've got to go to a break. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights Recourse or email us at Rights Recourse. We'll be back after the break.
Type 1 diabetes happens when your pancreas stops working, so the body does not get insulin anymore.
I have diabetes. My life is changed. I was in a total state.
Too much food, too little exercise. That's what it's about.
Hot flushes. So you would start with lifestyle modification, wearing cotton clothing, eating right, etc. And then hormone treatment for hot flushes.
Join me on Health Talk every Saturday morning between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. as we unpack current health stories.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. We are talking about the plight of domestic workers. Deputy Minister, I'm reminded by a question I heard on the floor here from one of the cameramen. What if I'm a bachelor and I employ somebody and I decide I don't need this person for the whole week, but I need this person once, twice a week to come and wash my clothes and come and iron them, and that's it? How do I determine how much must be paid?
Well, the sectoral determination takes into account that very fact, that sometimes you need the services of a domestic worker only for a number of hours. So you can employ her on the basis of hours and pay her accordingly. You can also employ her on the basis of a week. So there's a weekly determination. The 1,800 plus is for those who are paid on a monthly basis.
Mam Dudley, the other thing I wanted to ask, do the employers, the employees, the domestic workers, in other words, know ukuthi they qualify for EUIF?
Yes, they know. Half of them they know. The others they don't know. They just want to know if the problem comes.
Minister, who determines, in other words, who's responsible for deducting payee from the employees?
Well, the employer is expected to register herself with the UIF as an employer. At the same time, to register the employee. In the course of doing that, then he also makes arrangements. Well, she, most of the time, as I say, she also makes arrangements with the Unemployment Insurance Fund when she registers that employee at the labor center, so that the deductions are made, because she is expected to give the employee a pay slip that is going to indicate that indeed the deductions have been made, so that when the time comes for the employee to go and access these benefits. She's got the proof that indeed deductions were made. If you see, sometimes you find that an employer would deduct money that he says is for the unemployment insurance fund, only to find that he's not doing that. So that's why it's important that a pay slip would be given to a domestic worker so that she can also have proof that indeed money was taken from her for this purpose.
One of the other things, probably I should not have asked this question, probably let me go ahead and ask it. Not so long ago, we heard that the UIF needed to be recapitalized. Has this been done now that we are adding more people to be paid out of the UIF?
Well, I think that was a long time ago. The UIF is one of the most wealthy funds in the country, to the extent that you might recall that the Minister of Finance had mooted the idea that there should be a moratorium for a year on the part of the employers and the employees, so that no deductions are made for the unemployment insurance fund, because there's enough money. Of course, that is still under discussion, and I'm not sure if that is going to fly. But there are no problems at the UIF. It has all the funds that it needs.
Mamduli, Ingati, you seem to be happy with this arrangement that Abantu can claim UIF.
Yes, we happy about that because as domestic workers, we didn't have before UIF. Now, government including us to under UIF. So we're happy because you know that if you're not working, you dismiss or whatever. So you know to go to Department of Labor and claim this UIF and carry on with your life.
Vic, when we have seen a new phenomenon in South Africa where we get employees, domestic workers who come from outside South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Lesotho, come and work in South Africa. And how does this compare to the rest of the world? I know we have seen employees, domestic workers from the Philippines going to work in Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East.
Well, this is a common phenomenon throughout the world. You'll find in Europe, from some of the less developed countries, you'll find them moving into certain parts of Europe. You'll find from Africa going to Europe, etc. So the Zimbabwean, Malawi, Lesotho, Swaziland workers who come into South Africa in the domestic worker environment is not an uncommon practice. The difficulty is that you have those that are documented and that have their papers in order, and they would find themselves being paid the minimum wage in terms of the sectoral determination. The challenge lies when you have workers that are not legitimately in the country or haven't had their papers sorted out, and they tend to offer their services at below the going rate or the sectoral determination. And that then undermines all of the good work that is being done by the government departments.
It must be a stumbling block, Mamduli, for you as a union when we have people from outside South Africa coming to work as domestic workers and they are paid less than what you require.
Yes, there is a lot of stumbling block. Yes, there is. What we're saying that to these people coming from outside, they're supposed to do what we are doing here in South Africa. Yes, we're going to accommodate them. But if they're going to take whatever, but because they used to take whatever because they are vulnerable, so they take whatever they give.
Minister, are these people also covered by the Labour Relations Act?
Well, every worker in South Africa is covered by all the laws that are applicable, whether they are foreigners or nationals. The important thing is that they must be registered, because now they cannot take advantage of the benefits that are accorded to them by the law if they are not registered, because they can't be, they are not documented. They can't go and apply for these UIF benefits and things like that. And also, as Mandule has said here, them taking on work which is not under conditions that are not according to the laws, it makes the situation a bit difficult, because now they are being exploited, and in the course of them being exploited, now they are shutting out South Africans from getting the jobs which they would get in accordance and be paid in accordance with the laws of the country. So one would appeal to the foreign nationals who come to the country to get themselves registered so that they are properly within the system, the database, and don't contribute to the continuation of the exploitation and exclusion of workers.
Whose responsibility is it to see to it that domestic workers who come from outside South Africa have the correct papers, the right papers to work, they have work permits, and they also are registered with Home Affairs and all of those other things that they need to be done?
You just mentioned the person responsible is Home Affairs. Home Affairs is responsible for immigration. So anybody who comes to another country is supposed to come through the formal entry point, that they're supposed to produce their visas if they are required to produce visas, and also to produce passports. And the law basically is to the effect that people allowed to come into South Africa must be people who have skills that we don't have as South Africans.
I was about to ask that question.
Yeah, because that's what has to happen. So there has to be collaboration between Home Affairs and the Department of Labor to see to it that the people who come into the country for purposes of getting employment are people who are going to do jobs that we don't have the capacity to do. And domestic work, I think we definitely have more than enough people who can do that.
Mamduli, we know Kuti, domestic workers are not only exploited because of they are being underpaid and ill-treated, they are sometimes ill-treated. What other forms of ill-treatment takes place for domestic workers?
Sexually harassment and yeah, like if a person who get injured, as we said earlier, that we don't have compensation, so all those things is ill-treat us.
Well, let's take this call from KZN from Pelelani. Pelelani, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Yeah, I wanted to ask, my wife has been working for this man from I think it was from last year, but she hasn't got any what we call pay slip, and I think she is not even getting that UIF. She's not deducted from that UIF, and I think what she's getting is 2,000 rand a month. She gets paid 500 rand a week. How much is the basic salary?
Okay, thank you, Telelani. Telelani here is asking a question that we probably have answered. I don't really want to venture and answer the question again, Mr. Deputy Minister.
Yeah, first of all, depending on where the person lives, if she's employed in places like Durban or Johannesburg, then she is entitled to something like 2,400 and something rand plus, just a little under 2,500 rand. I don't remember the actual figure in terms of the weeks and hours, but coming to what she said, that the person has not been getting a pay slip, and that he believes that the person has not been registered for the unemployment insurance fund, then that person should go immediately to the nearest labor center and explain the position to the officials in that labor center. She will be advised as what needs to be done. Obviously, the owner, rather the employer owes that employee quite a big amount of money, because as I said earlier, it's the responsibility of the employer to register the employee so that he appears in the unemployment insurance fund. The deduction from the salary, the 1% that is taken from the salary of the employee, has to be facilitated by the employer, because she's the one who has the facilities and the wherewithal to do all of that.
Mamutuli, his wife has been working, but she akanayo a pay slip, I told you pay slip, she doesn't have a pay slip, and niya shukuti abaqashi funa abanikeza about the pay slip.
Yes, the workers, they're supposed to know that the law now is on the table. Department of Labor and unions cannot go to their working place or their houses that here the pay slip, you must do that, you don't have, you didn't register, here's the form. They must come out and use these labor centers. They must come out and use the union. That's what they're supposed to do.
In other words, employees must come out and use the labor centers and use the union so that their things can be sorted out. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights and Recourse or email us at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
We live in a digital era, and the number of Africans with mobile phones is rapidly increasing.
Twitter use is predominantly being done on smartphones. This is a very African phenomenon.
Here, there are constantly new innovative ways to make the internet more affordable. With that, we're seeing protests against governments proposing methods to limit access. On Network, we give you information about all of this. We also have new computers, games, and robots.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT.
Welcome back. We continue our discussion on the plight of domestic workers, but let's take this call from Mondreki from Cape Town. Mondreki, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Oh, Mondreki, switch off your radio or your television set. Good afternoon. Mondreki, what's your question? Are you there? Yeah, well, go ahead. Go ahead and ask your question. What's your question, Mondreki? Whilst Mondreki is trying to think of a question, let's go and hear what the Twitter community has to say. Sianda Wiseman says they work overtime and get paid, and some of their and not get paid, and some of their employers treat them like dogs. And Dogozo Kamakamu says even unions don't care about domestic workers. They are treated like slaves. Vic, let me come to you around that very issue because I wanted to know earlier, how does South Africa compare internationally with other countries? We have seen horrific stories coming out of the Middle East where some employees, domestic workers from other countries like the Philippines were ill-treated and treated very badly.
I think we'd like to believe in South Africa that we don't have such cases, but unfortunately we do. I think there are many workers that are almost treated like slaves, the hours that they work, the sexual harassment that they're subjected to, and the poor pay that or working conditions that many of them find themselves in. So we are not exempt from this, and it is a huge challenge in order to deal with this. The difficult side is that to police all the different households through the country is almost an impossibility, and there we rely on the employers to make sure that we maintain certain standards and that we isolate or that we can tackle those employers that are not abiding by the rules that have been set down and the standards that we've got.
The other question I wanted to ask, probably Deputy Minister, the question I wanted to ask is the issues around the issues we're talking about of migrant workers who come into South Africa to come and work, the issues around presently we are dealing with this case of xenophobia around South Africa, and what role does the department play to get to get those people who come from outside South Africa working as domestic workers who are also being chased out by the I saw some lady in some television short yesterday.
Well, any criminal activities that are committed by South Africans or anyone for that matter naturally have to be reported to the police. It's the responsibility of every citizen to ensure that crime is reported to the police. It's a crime to take the law into your own hands, to beat up, assault people merely because they come from another country. on the understanding that they are taking away your work. You can't do that. You don't take that into your own hands. If you see that there's a person who is in the country illegally, you inform the authorities so that the authorities can take the necessary steps, such as taking this person to Home Affairs so that they can be registered. It's unacceptable. It cannot be excused under whatever circumstances that people, just because they are foreigners, were to be beaten and assaulted and their goods taken away. That's theft, that's robbery, that's a crime. So the fact that they seem to be taking our jobs, we should also understand that these are human beings. These are people who have escaped suffering from their countries. We are all enduring the legacy of colonialism, where our resources were taken away by our colonizers, where we were left after independence with a situation where the governance systems were not in place, where you find that some of our own post-colonial governments are misgoverning our countries. So those people are not responsible for what is happening in their countries. They are escaping to South Africa because they understand that this is the country whose main constitution is rooted in Ubuntu, which is that you treat another human being as you would like them to treat you. So that we ought to continue to be motivated by that principle, that a human being is a human being, even if he is in the country unlawfully. It doesn't justify that you take the law into your own hands and beat them up.
Yes, let's take this call quickly from Fossil Rust. Good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Hello, Ben. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, Ben. What's your question?
Minjan. Hello.
Yes, Ben. What's the question? We can hear you.
Ngifuna comment about.
Yes, go ahead.
Ama employers athatha advantage. Kukhona umbhuti okhulumile lapho wabuza ukuthi what the government yenzayo ngama cheap labor. So ama employer athatha advantage. Umuntu mawusebenza ku employer akayi ukuregister ku UIF, and once wamubuza ukuthi why angaregister, obviously you dismiss you because you tender ama cheap labor. So the only thing efanele isolution fanele ukuthi ubuzile omunye ubhuti wathi the government ithini ngama cheap labor. Ama employer athatha ama advantage because they know ukuthi they have cheap labor. You never ask them anything because if you ask them, they dismiss you and they call the cheap labor. So ungifuna ukwazi ukuthi the government, the department, ithini ngama cheap labor. Ngoba namanje mawungabheka imali ka brokers into engafuneki ebantwini ma still sasekhona nama employers athatha advantage ngalokho. That is why sihlala sine problem and it's about 20 years manje kune democracy ma ama problems is still there. That is the comment ngifuna ukuyazi ukuthi.
Thank you, Ben.
What are we doing about the cheap labor?
Thank you, Ben. We'll respond to Ben's question after the break. If you'd like to join us and do like Ben, call us but ask your questions concisely. Phone us on 011 5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights Recourse. Stay with us.
Media Monitor. The title says it all.
We do have a dilemma here because Lesotho is a sovereign country. I don't think it is the obligation of South Africa's media to even tell the people of Lesotho what's going on in Lesotho.
Join our panel of experts as they unpack and monitor all the leading and breaking news stories making waves in the print and social media platforms. That's Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali.
Sundays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. We are talking domestic workers, the plight of domestic workers. Quickly, before we come to respond to the question that Ben asked, probably you can also hone into that question. The question is, what is the International Labour Organization's stance regarding the employment of underage children?
We are strongly against the employment of children who are underage. We have a very strict and good policy on child labour matters. And when it comes to that, the children need to be educated and they need to be in school. And we do not accept or tolerate the employment of children in any formal sense. And that's where we stand, and that's how we advocate it to the different governments throughout the world. And just on the point of xenophobia, we are strongly opposed to the xenophobic aspect of the actions as well that are currently going on in the country. And we would not only think that we need to speak against it, but that all South Africans need to stand together in getting rid of the xenophobic instances and attitudes.
Deputy Minister, I picked up something that says there seems to be a dichotomy around the one sentence. The Act, Section 44, subsection 1A and 2 seem to be contradictory in one aspect or another, but it says, in one case it says, children who are under the age of 15 should not be working. And I believe that children are children until they are 21.
Well, yeah, I think it depends because, for instance, there's the question of statutory rape, which is the age of 16. A person who is under the age of 16, you can't have consensual sex with her. And then the question of 21 years of age. Well, there's a question of 18 years of age in terms of which you can go and vote and all those kinds of things. It depends. But the important thing is that children who are not of the age that they should be carrying out responsibilities of a physical nature especially, should not be doing any kind of formal work. We are signatories of the International Labour Conventions, and those conventions are totally against the employment of children under age.
Mamutuli, many times we hear, especially on farms, where if the domestic worker who is a mother is sick, then the farmer would say, oh, let the doctor come and do the chores that she's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, this is totally acceptable because this child is underage. I think that parents are supposed to go to Department of Labour and report this because it's not good to use, which means you use this worker, this child, to be a worker, which is not supposed to be.
Minister, I want to go back to something else that I picked up, that I raised. What happens when a domestic worker is abused and sexually or beaten or being made to do chores she cannot do, like washing cars, for instance?
Well, of course, that's a crime to abuse a person, to sexually abuse her or physically or otherwise. It's a crime that ought to be reported to the police. But if it is tied up with your working conditions, then the Labour Department is there. Especially if you talk about a person doing chores that she is not paid for. Because as we say, when you get employed, you are entitled to written particulars of the type of work you have to do. So if they say you're going to wash cars, wash dogs, and do all of those things in addition to your domestic chores, then it's up to you to agree or not agree. That's why we encourage prospective domestic workers that once they are given that piece of paper outlining the particulars of work, you take it to your family or to the labor center. CCMA is also there to advise you as to whether or not these kinds of chores you should be performing them, and if you do, what is it that you are entitled to.
Dilzendaba, let's take this call from Kaya from Johannesburg. Kaya, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse. Yes, Kaya?
Good afternoon, sir.
Are you there, Kaya?
My question is basically to find out exactly in terms of the standard. What's the difference between us or South African countries in terms of our migration laws? Because we understand most of the people who are coming to South Africa are those who are very, very poor and not matching in the skills that we need, and it's almost an oversupply of what we need. What is it that our government is doing to prevent it?
because that's where the issue is, and it's mostly at the border gate, and also with people who are working at the migration centers when people are coming through the borders. Looks like there are sort of bribes and corruption that is probably taking there. Because there's no way that you can have people who come through and then everybody else is South African, they've got IDs, some passports are even future dated as permanent residents.
Well, I think the majority of
Those
that...
are the things that
Thank you, Kaya. Thank you,
because I
Kaya.
work for the
Thank you, Kaya. I think the majority of that is a Home Affairs question, but surely you did earlier indicate that we have an oversupply of domestic workers in South Africa.
Yes, that's true. The policy, as I said, is that we accept people who come from other countries inside our borders who are coming with skills that we do not have. So the problem, as he says, there's corruption, there's porous borders. That's why even the president, I think, has announced that some of the soldiers are going to be deployed in order to ensure that our borders are not as easy to access as it is the case, because most of these people don't come through the formal ports. They come through, they cross the fence, the rivers and so on, and end up inside the country. And we have this problem.
The final question that I need us to answer, all of us, is who should be monitoring all of this?
South African citizens, the employers and the employees, relatives of those who are employed and relatives of those who employ others. They should, because we would like to be like the Holy Spirit, where we are everywhere in every household, so that you can see the transgressors, the violators of the law, and take the necessary action. But it depends on the workers themselves, the employers, and importantly, the trade unions themselves.
Well, there you are. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 10 tonight and 5 on Monday morning. From all of us in the studio, thank you to our guests, and good afternoon.